Welcome to Beyond Bitcoin's Bonus Hangout Edition. To help further educate the BitShares community of potential partnerships and opportunities that reaches well beyond our ecosystem. A common ground where ideas and plans come to unite, wielding the true potential, possibilities, and power of the blockchain technology that we call BitShares. If you feel engaged to participate in these crucial conversations, then please visit beyondbitcoin.org for future hangouts. Also, please remember to vote for our BitShares delegate, Fuzzy.BeyondBitcoin, to help keep our community informed and up to date. On behalf of the Beyond Bitcoin crew, we want to say thank you, and we appreciate your time and trust. Now let's listen in to our current guest.
Welcome to a Beyond Bitcoin Hangout. Today is Tuesday, October 27, 2015. We're joined today by Jim Willie from Golden Jackass and the Hat Trick newsletter. He is very well known in the Liberty space and the PM circles, aka precious metals, and really has a pretty good track record of talking about what he sees going on in the geopolitical and economic situations across the world. We like to bring him on to kind of focus a little bit on something that is not necessarily cryptocurrency centric, but something that ties in very well with cryptocurrency, because a lot of what Jim talks about is with respect to the reset of the economy and what's going to come from that. So we like to kind of merge minds here and get everybody thinking and talking and hearing what Jim has to say about what's going on with our world and the world events. So with that said, I want to let you know, Jim, we've got a few people here in Mumble. Bytemaster, who is the chief developer of BitShares, the decentralized exchange I talked about a while back. He is also working with something called Cryptonomics, the CEO there. And he's going to be sitting in listening, and maybe he'll speak up if he finds something interesting. But he is along the lines of where we kind of come from in terms of looking at the world from a broad perspective. We have some other community members here, Crypto Prometheus and Once Upon a Time. So if you gentlemen have a question at any point in time, feel free to let Jim know. But with that said, how's it going, Jim?
I always like to say it's going very strange. I felt for 2 years that it's gone beyond surreal. I never thought the dollar would get past 2010. And once we got past 2010, the extraordinary things started coming online and becoming main installed features like 0%, like QE. I called QE to infinity. As soon as we got to the taper talk and stuff like that, because I thought, man, this is such lying bull. They're not going to raise rates. They can't. They'll destroy the whole treasury bond system and the Wall Street banks and the Fed's balance sheet. They're not going to raise rates. That's just so we're very surreal. When the bankers start getting thrown out of the windows a couple of years ago, that was a realization of the strangest forecast I had of all to come to pass. And I thought way back in 2011, if we don't get justice, we're going to get a lot of mid-level people in the banking industry. We're going to get them killed because they know too much. They've done too much. They've been in charge of too much as mules and agents. So they have to go. And they were killed. A lot of them, and I think there are going to be more. So we're in surreal times here, Justin, and it's going to get a little more surreal. And you know, the biggest element of snapshot reality coming back is Russia moving in to clean out the ISIS strongholds in Syria. And I hear now they're going to be moving into Iraq, and they're going to increase their sorties by triple or quadruple per day. So that's an element of reality, because what it means is Russia will make it quite clear to the world that the agent of terror was coming from the United States. Lavrov, the foreign minister of Russia, let it be known to the Europeans, in particular Germany, that the United States had a long list of targets, excellent targets for ISIS, and they issued 0 strike orders. So Russia said, all right, give me that list. Give us that list. We'll take care of it. And they did. And now Europe is saying, well, wait a minute. Why can Russia accomplish in 1 week what the United States could not in 2 years? And the reason is simple. The U.S. does not strike its own assets. So this is surreal. And now it's starting to get real. And the contrast of surreal versus real is stark. And it's awakening. It's like cold water in your face once in a while. So how am I doing? I'm doing pretty weird. I'm dealing with a lot of different things. The hate mail is way down. That's nice. I was getting 4, 5, 6 a day, and now I just get one stupid idiot making a very dumb comment. Oh, I don't know, every 10 days or so. And I'm noticing that most of the hate mail that I get has to do with a comment like this. Well, you idiot, you don't seem to understand much of anything about the dollar. You said it was going to crash and it's still going up. No, I said the dollar is going to rise some more as evidence of the broken system, and then be replaced in the Grand Vanishing Act. Now, this is a little complicated to understand as a forecast, but, I still get the hate mail on that because that's complicated. They see the dollar gets higher in valuation. I refuse to use the word stronger. It's going to rise in exchange rate. And it's evidence of its death process. Death, removal, execution. We're getting a lot of petrodollar derivative contracts that are getting liquidated, and the result is an enormous amount of demand for dollars to close out those contracts. So all of a sudden one day you have $500 billion worth of dollar demand that the central banks must come up with, and so there's your demand, and the dollar goes up, and it all looks like it's very, very nice. No, it's not. It's wrecking the U.S. economy. We have propaganda that the higher dollar is really good for the economy. It's going to make, energy cheap. Really? How is it going to do that? I think it's going to wreck the energy sector. So, we got a lot of stupid stuff. I have a joke that I've used for a couple of years that the chief exports from the United States have been toxic paper bonds, treasury bonds. We've been exporting diabetes through fast food and junk. We've been exporting laced vaccines, but now we've got a new one. Well, let's not forget GMO food seeds, crop seeds. Well, now we got a new export, Justin, and it's very telling about the condition of the U.S. economy. We have something like 200,000 empty containers leaving the California port facilities heading toward Asia, and they're empty. 200,000 empty containers this year. 200,000 empty containers. So our newest export is empty containers. We're shipping air. We're exporting and paying for shipped air. And I'm sure it's quite fresh, that air inside the containers. I don't think there's a lot of rotting food and fetid, waste sewage, but, we're exporting maybe fresh air to Asia. That's great.
Or containers for China to use in their new ports.
Well, I saw a picture once, it's about a month ago, a picture of a guy riding a bicycle in Beijing with a blue sky. And the picture had a byline, for the first time in a long time, the Beijing air quality is quite good. It could be from both the efforts in China to clean up their pollution, but also the shutdown of some of their factories from the global recession. So, interesting times where we're in very dangerous and tenuous times right now. And I don't have a good feeling about a lot of things in the near future, but I do believe that after a storm season, we're going to come out on the other side with a legitimate gold-based global system. And I think the gold standard is going to start in trade. I've been saying this consistently. It's going to start in trade because that's what Asia and the emerging markets control. Trade, output, shipping. It's going to start in trade, and then it's going to go quickly into the banking system because when the nations of the world realize we don't need treasury bills to pay for the shipped goods, and soon you're going to see the Gulf Emirates permit RMB payments, non-dollar payments for oil. That's going to change a lot of bank systems. So we're going to be moving into a gold banking standard after the trade standard. And lastly would be the currency standard. And I think the currency standard is going to happen kind of through I don't know how to describe it exactly with a name. It's a kind of a proxy tool. The letters of credit are going to be gold trade notes. And they're going to have to be gold backed. And in order to do that, the banking systems will have to adapt and bring in the gold trade notes as short-term, like bills, not treasury bills, but gold bills. And then suddenly you're going to see that maybe the RMB is equivalent to the gold trade note. And then you're going to see the RMB go gold backed. So the Chinese currency, I think, might be the first gold backed currency. A lot of things going on, Justin. It's exciting, but I just wish it weren't so hectic and dangerous and, people about to lose 70% of their life savings because they're so dedicated to the paper wealth world. And they're so distrustful of anything gold. I mean, I had an event happen 2 months ago. My father said to me, Jim, your younger sister has a financial advisor, and he's been telling us to put a certain percentage of our net worth into gold. And I said, so are you going to do it? And he said, yeah, we've been doing it for the last couple months. And I said, so I've been saying this for 5 years, and you've been ignoring me, and her financial advisor says it, and you do it right away. And he said, well, yeah. Wow.
Well, he had advisor in his name. You didn't.
He also had the qualifications. So instead of being an ornery ass, I said to both her and my father, I hope he comes with a respect for the Austrian School of Economics and an appreciation for sound money, because otherwise you might not have any gold whatsoever. You might just have some paper posing as gold. And I think it went over their head. So I'm not going to worry about it.
Sure. Well, you talked about a few things here. One of them was Russia, and they're kicking ISIS's butt. But this actually kind of flowed into some discussion about China as well. And this gets me into a point where I have a question that I sent you all these questions already, but I'd like to really focus on this one for a moment since we've already covered it to a degree. And my question is, Russia is kicking ISIS's ass. China is behind on creating their CNY renminbi swap facilities. And some Pentagon officials are saying nuclear strikes are on the table with Russia. How do you see the relationship between Russia and China playing out, considering the seeming stance of many in the high military leadership? Can you give us a little bit of your impression regarding this situation?
Sure. I think the Russia-Chinese relationship is the best it's been in 1,000 years. The best it's been in 10 centuries. As for the comment about the RMB swap facilities being behind schedule, I think they're doing extraordinarily well. I don't know where you get that. They've got 31 nations now with Chinese yuan swap facilities that avoid all U.S. dollar transaction on a net basis in settlement, like between, say, Brazil and China. That's doing extremely well. Now we've got a competition for RMB hub facilities It's not just a competition between London and Frankfurt, Germany. You've also got Paris and Zurich, Switzerland involved in that. So that's a huge progress point. As for first strike nukes being on the table, that's been the case ever since February of 2014 when Ukraine came onto the scene. And I don't think we've had, let me check. I don't think we've had any nuclear first strikes. I am hearing that there have been a number of smaller nukes, neutron hits, like in Ukraine. If they have a bunch of them in 1 week, does anybody even know about it? I mean, do they report it? And so it's very strange. Russia is kicking ISIS butt. That is to be sure. And I think what that has done is change the entire geopolitical stage and balance, not of power, but of perceptions. The U.S. has been on this war of terror, war on terrorism. I've been saying for 3 years or more that it's a smokescreen to cover the U.S. narcotics business with central point in Afghanistan.
Yep.
If you take a look at some of the actual data from Afghanistan, you'll see that even before the U.S. invasion, the U.S. was involved in deals with the Taliban in the year 2000. And after 2003, it ramped up quickly. But around 2003, it was something like 130 or 150 tons of heroin a year in production in Afghanistan. And right now, it's somewhere around 1,300, 10 times larger as a result of the U.S. war on terrorism. So I ask people, is the result of the U.S. participation in the war on terrorism really a tenfold rise in heroin coming out of Afghanistan? The answer is it's not a war against terrorism. It's a war against all dollar opposition. That's the war. It's a financial global war against dollar opposition, like say, Saddam Hussein, who was selling oil in euros, like against Iran, that no longer wanted to be dollar-centric, was selling oil in euros, was selling oil in gold, was doing barter trade. The biggest barter trade oil participant in the world today is Iran, and the U.S. does not like it. So the war on terror is a bunch of bull, and it's getting exposed now because Russia's knocking out the targets, and you're getting a lot of stories like, how come there's several hundred Toyota, Tundra trucks? Where'd they come from? And the answer was U.S. military contractors sold them to the Iraq government, and they ended up in ISIS hands. Well, gee, isn't that curious? It's a lot more than that. There are all kinds of stuff. There was a bunch of emails that were found on John McCain, Senator moron John McCain of Arizona, who destroyed 3 aircraft during his training missions in the military and never should have been advanced as a pilot. And as Putin says, he spent 3 years in a hole in North Vietnam, and that's where he left his brains. But there was a bunch of emails in the accounts for John McCain that were found to be direct links and communications with the ISIS commanders, and furthermore, direct links with instructions to the video studios that made the falsified beheading terror videos, where not a single example showed a blood spurt coming out of the neck. So, the war on terror, that's now being unmasked as a U.S. phony operation. And it's all very ugly stuff. But what we've also got going here is Russia decided that they're going to step in. And I think they made a conscious decision. We're not just going to step in. We're not just going to wipe out a lot of ISIS strongholds rather quickly. We're going to do some demos of particular weapon systems and weapon features. They already showed us something in, I think, May of 2014 with the USS Donald Cook. Let it be known, I'm a U.S. citizen. I'm a U.S. patriot. I pull for the U.S. during the World Cup and the Olympics. I love our athletes. I love our movies, except for, Zero Dark 30 and, Argo and all those fake Oscars they get and the fake nominations they get.
Propaganda.
It's all propaganda crap. But, I want to see the U.S. military restored where one of their main functions is not protecting the heroin poppy fields of Afghanistan. There are thousands of photographs of U.S. military personnel protecting the Afghan poppy fields. I mean, it's not hard to find photos. What's hard to do is to show people who are looking at the photos what they mean, because their brains aren't connected to their stems. No, I'd like to see the U.S. military cleaned up. I'd like them to restore the Constitution and push back the Patriot Act and shove it in the shit can. I mean, I'm a patriot and I love my country. I love my country.
Well,
I love Costa Rica. I've got my residence here, so I'm planted. It's a lot going on here. But anyway, that's my impression. I don't believe that China is behind in any way, shape, or form with the RMB progress. And I did say that there was a delay of a year regarding the reset and the RMB being included in the IMF. Well, I'm a little bit taken by surprise at how quickly the IMF did a reversal. And there are, I think, a number of reasons why that happened, and maybe we'll get to that topic.
Yeah, well, there's plenty of time to get into some of these topics. One of the topics that really hit me whenever you brought up the heroin trade and how Afghanistan, statistically speaking, whenever America goes in there to fix the place, we have large amounts of poppy production increase. But, this really falls into something that is kind of it dovetails into something that's very valuable here. And I kind of want your opinion. What we've basically seen happen was, have you heard of a guy named Ross Albright?
Refresh my memory.
Well, there's something called Silk Road. And Ross Albright was the gentleman who put together Silk. And Silk Road was essentially a market where you could buy anything, a black market, using Bitcoin, which would literally gain a lot of traction and value for Bitcoin itself as a cryptocurrency. Because let's face it, once you have something like that that's easily exchanged for something like drugs, it does really challenge the dollar too, right then. Would that be correct in my way of thinking?
Well, I do believe that the principal currency of the realm in narcotics is the dollar, yeah. But I don't know that that's how best to challenge the dollar. I think the best way to challenge the dollar is to change the way oil is paid for, like with the RMB, or to change the way emerging markets in China require payments for shipped goods. I think that's also going to be the RMB. That's how I would think that the dollar gets unseated. But there's a dark world there, to be sure. And a lot of the dollar rules that you hear are intended to target the competitors in narcotics. Whenever they change the rule on cash, it's often directed somewhat at the narcotics competitors. There's a whole world there of narcotics and competitors and banking and investments with the dirty money afterwards. It's a very big world, and I have a little bit of information into that and a glimpse into that, but it's something that I really don't like talking much about. I will discuss it with certain well-informed friends, but it's not something that it really pays off to display the expertise in, because it tends to make you a target. I like to stick with my knitting, as my dad says. Jim, stick with your knitting, the finance and economics, and I think that probably will serve you well. And that's what I do. So anyway, I'm not sure what this Ross Albright is or what he's doing with the cryptocurrencies, but I've been honest with you that I don't make a mission to understand and research the cryptocurrencies, but I've got some opinions about it. And they're not really opinions that you can say, well, that's a really well-informed opinion. No, it's just an opinion from a guy who's pretty well informed about a lot of other different things.
Exactly. And this actually brings in a place, somebody here in the community is wanting to talk. So I'll just step back for a moment and let them say something, and then I'll get in on what I was going to say.
This is Dan Larimer from BitShares. And I've used to follow all of this stuff in great detail. A lot of the stuff you've been talking about, I studied it. And I found it really caused me to take actions out of fear. And for the past several years, I've largely ignored a lot of this type of information because it just keeps going on, and the markets remain irrational longer than I could remain solvent. I bought silver and it fell in value. I've done all these things, and it just isn't productive. And I found that wanting the world to change and complaining about it wasn't really productive. I needed to find something productive to do. And that's why I created BitShares. And my whole purpose of what I'm trying to do is to find free market solutions that secure life, liberty, and property. And by free market, I mean solutions so powerful, they can protect us from the governments itself and all the things that they are actually doing. So I'm curious what things we can do to change ourselves, what solutions out there have you seen that are not just wishful thinking, not just hoping they'll change, not just learning more information. Well, but what can we actually do?
That's a good question. I mean, Jim, what do you think that individuals would be best suited to do to kind of rise above the current problems that we're seeing? He said basically, and I agree with him, when we only focus on the problems, we really have a hard time finding solutions sometimes. Now focusing on the problems is very important, right? To acknowledge them, to teach people about them and all that good stuff. However, Bytemaster's question was, on an individual level, what do you see being valuable things that people can do to help fix the situation? Like focusing on a solution-oriented approach.
Yeah, I address this once in a while. I do actually get some emails from people saying, why don't you discuss this more? All right, let me bring an analogy. A guy is not feeling well. He doesn't have energy, he's just not quite right. He can't focus right. So he doesn't know what to do. Well, the diagnosis is that he's got diabetes. Now that they know he has diabetes, they can give him some treatment. If you don't know what the problem is, you can't give it a treatment. So that's why I focus on the problem, so people can understand the diabetes or hypertension or leukemia, like the dollar has, and then they can do some treatment. If you don't know you have diabetes, you don't know that you need to take insulin. If you know you've got a sick dollar, you know you need to invest in the good sound money, and that's gold and silver, coins and bars. So what can people do? It's really not very complicated. You need to stop listening to the financial propaganda bullshit. 80 to 90% of the financial and economic news is incorrect. I make that statement, and I will back that statement to the hilt. As you push me up against the wall, I will come up with 100 examples to prove my point. So you stop listening to the news, you get rid of your stock accounts, unless you're really looking forward to losing 30 or 70% of it. And getting rid of your stock account now would mean that you're selling it to Wall Street and the Fed, who are pumping it up. Why not sell it to the corrupt agent that's rigging the market? And then buy gold and silver, which again, Wall Street and the Fed are suppressing and keeping cheap for you. So sell your stocks and bonds and mutual funds, take the high price that's artificial that they give you on a silver platter. Turn around and buy discounted gold and silver and not the paper horse manure that they peddle on Wall Street, like the ETFs, like GLD, the SPDR Trust, Gold Trust, the GLD and SLV, they're nonsense. And don't buy the mining stocks. That's just more paper that's going down the toilet. They've got their own version of inflation there. So what do? You make sure you own a lot of gold and silver, and you learn how to be a stacker, and you get real patient in acquiring it, and you become willing to pay more than the corrupt low market price for it. In other words, pay the premium. Take your IRAs and your 401ks, cash them out, and pay 40% tax on them. Pay it.
Well, in terms of
silver, and as soon as silver doubles, you're back in business. You're back where you were. We're going to see gold find 10,000, and we're going to see silver find 400. We're going to see a 25-to-1 ratio. I don't know how long it's going to take. I don't really care how long it's going to take, because I know it's going to be in my lifetime. Now, if you only got a couple of years to live because you've got diabetes or leukemia, that's a different story. Maybe you make a plan that your children or your favorite little nephews and nieces can enjoy.
Can I ask you a question? Because Crypto Prometheus brought up a good point regarding the gold and silver. This is a manipulated market, right? And from what I've heard, and actually in the background, is that the people who are trying to go for this quote unquote NWO New World Order thing are really the ones who are trying to capture as much gold and silver as possible. Do you think that that's a potential problem?
No, I think it's a confirmation.
A confirmation that gold and silver is where they want to take
Jim
us.
Sinclair, a.k.a. Santa, he's a bit of an odd duck, but he did something very brave in late 2009 when he disclosed to his entire community, which is a very large community, that the Wall Street executives, both active and past, have been accumulating gold in a gigantic way, and they do so in private accounts. So what they've been doing is gutting the public companies like the New York Money Center, Wall Street banks. They gut them and make them all huge short in order to keep the price down so that the elites can buy as much gold as they can. And they put it in a fund called the Carlyle Group. So is that a problem?
Yep.
No, it means that you only have to compete with these guys in order to find any and buy any. But they're doing you a favor by bad-mouthing gold and making sure the press and that total turd named Warren Buffett speak ill of gold and silver. Now, I call Warren Buffett a turd because he's a freaking liar. His Berkshire Hathaway in, 2000 and, I can't remember exactly, 2010? He claimed that, oops, looks like we sold silver early. No, he didn't. He was collecting rather substantial income and selling calls on his big 129,000 ounce hoard of silver. Now, I might have the date wrong. Maybe it was not 2010. Maybe it was earlier, because what happened was he forfeited the 129,000 ounces of silver, and that became the SLV fund managed by a London entity. Okay, so why was Warren a liar? He was selling option calls. They call writing calls. He was selling option calls on his silver, collecting 8, 9, 10% a month, while he was saying that gold and silver earned no yield. Well, sure, it earns a yield. You sell the option calls, and it turns out to be, on the order of 100% per year, give or take. But with the risk that if there's a run up, you're forced to sell and forfeit your gold and silver. that's what Berkshire Hathaway did. And he said we sold early. No, that explains why he didn't get much. I think they got something like $7.50 per ounce of silver instead of the ongoing 10 or 11. I wish I knew the year. I just cannot remember the year. It was a while back. But, I've got some experience selling calls, and I got called away a couple of times, and, it wasn't fun. And, you wait for it to come back down, you buy it again, and you do make money selling it for that strike price. That's what they call it in the options. But, there's a lot of things that people can do, but you must stop believing the news, and that includes believing what they say about Russia. Russia, in my opinion, and China together, they hold out a great deal of hope for the future to interrupt this new world order. They hold out hope to install the gold standard. Whether it comes, it doesn't matter where it starts. If it starts in trade, it'll end up in banking and currency. If it starts in currency, it'll end up in trade. But Russia and China don't want this dollar. The Rothschilds out of their banking system. It wasn't a year and a half or two that the Ukraine incident happened. So, I like to connect the dots and attach a bit of a motive for a big action like the Ukraine incident. But they also stole 33 tons of Ukraine gold. And now the parliament in Kiev, Ukraine, is hopping mad. Where's our gold? We're a bankrupt nation, they're saying. Where's our gold? Oh, it's at the New York Fed to make sure that it's safe. Yeah. They'll never see it again. Just like Libya, we'll never see their 144 tons again.
Well, it will be safe, though.
Pardon me?
Just not... It will be safe.
It'll be safely sold into the gold market in order to maintain the dollar system.
Sure. And from what I hear you're saying is
sold. I don't think the Ukraine gold kept the gold market going for more than 6 to 10 weeks.
Well, it sounds like they're not grabbing very much gold anyway. Like when they're going into these places, they're getting what, like 100 tons?
Well, 100 tons is a pretty good stash to walk away with. Ukraine was only 33. That's pretty tiny. I think there were something like 5 tons out of Tunisia. These are tiny. Yeah, the U.S. is having a hard time stealing gold, and that's why they're trying to go after the big prize of the global funds and the big Asian Chinese accounts. But the White Dragons are not going to let this happen on their watch, and there's a big battle. I call it the new sheriff in town. And I learned about this during a pretty interesting episode starting in March of 2012. The Voice told me that in late 2011, there was a $50 billion, B as in boy, $50 billion war chest that was created in the late months of 2011. And then he told me what it was going to be used for starting in March. It was to remove 1,000 tons of gold out of London per month. And they did so for the rest of 2012, all of 2013, and almost all of 2014. So I got back to him months and months later and said, it's still on, 1,000 a month? He said, yeah, 1,000 tons of gold a month. And it's not just draining the Queen's gold of England, but there's gold that has to come from the BIS out of Basel, Switzerland, and there's gold that's coming from the Vatican. So eventually, they're going to test the patience of Basel, Switzerland, and the Vatican in Rome for keeping the game going. And it went to the end of 2013, and with it was on the order of 25 to 30,000 tons of gold were removed from London. And, not just London, but London was the place where it was shipped from. So I think that Rome and Basel, Switzerland helped keep it flowing, make sure that the demand's made. And there was a big story tied in with that the London bankers and the European commissioners who set up the euro, the common euro currency region, officially called the European Monetary Union, the EMU, they improperly used Asian gold as collateral for the many, many derivatives holding together the euro. And they had to unwind it all. And that's what the removal was of the 1,000 tons a month. And I kept asking the question, who's running this process? Who is requiring the London bankers to remove 1,000 tons a month? Someone's got to have a lot of power there. And he said, yeah, there's a new sheriff in town. And later he said, yeah, it's the White Dragons, which is an enormous society and group of families. And I don't want to get into all their makeup because I only know a little bit about their makeup, but I know a good deal about their activities.
Sure.
So the new sheriff
and it sounds like they're squaring off against these guys.
And I think the new sheriff in town, the White Dragons, are directing a lot of activities related to the RMB, like a new accounting standards. The DSSI was recently adopted in China. And that was a major stumbling point for the IMF. Okay, so they met it. Whatever the IMF says, well, you're lacking this, you're lacking that. Okay, the Chinese do it. And then they say, okay, we're ready. And that's why I think the IMF is going to be forced to bring in the RMB into their basket of four for the special drawing rights, the SDR. It includes the dollar, euro, pound, and yen. And then there's going to be a group of five. Now, I've been saying this for the last several months. When it does happen, and I got distracted by the delay, and I admit that. I didn't think the delay would be overcome so quickly. But once it happens, there's an analyst at Standard Chartered Bank, and he has come out to say that once the IMF includes the RMB in their basket to make it from 4 to 5, there will be $1 trillion of RMB bonds put into the global banking system, sitting as reserves, meeting capital requirements. What does that mean? It means there's going to be a lot of sales and divestiture of the U.S. Treasury bonds, Euro bonds, UK gilts, and Japanese government bonds. Principally, dumping of the Treasury bonds. You cannot bring in $1 trillion worth of RMB bonds without removing, I think, something on the order of $700 billion worth of Treasury bonds. So that's what the inclusion means.
I mean, with the Asian investment, infrastructure, investment banking, and all that stuff, that's what these are all the pillars that they're putting up to start building the foundation for a new reserve currency status.
Yeah, right? I'd like to, you mentioned the AIIB, the infrastructure bank, and I love telling this little brief story. Well, gee, what about the BRICS Development Fund? That's their first fund. Why did they need an Asian infrastructure investment bank if they already had a BRICS Development Fund? And I think the answer goes like this. Well, the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, AIIB, came in to give particular focus to Asia. But if you look closely at the projects, you'll see it's to connect the Asians with other parts of the world. So it's really not just an Asian exclusive development set of projects. It's Brazilian ports to connect to Asia. It's a lot of things that connect to the West. So what really was the BRICS Development Fund, whose name has been changed to the BRICS Bank? I think this is going to be the BRICS Gold Central Bank. And it has $200 billion as seed money in it. It's all U.S. Treasuries. So the BRICS Bank is really going to be a big platform to convert U.S. Treasuries and probably some other major IMF currency sovereign bonds. It's going to be a platform to convert the U.S. Treasuries to gold, and I think serve as a major center for the BRICS and their new gold-backed currency, which will have a vehicle transition in the gold trade note, which basically pushes to the side the U.S. Treasury bill, the short-term treasuries. Short-term treasuries are what are used to pay for oil now. You got a bunch of container vessels, you owe a few $1 billion, you pay it in treasury bills. That's how trade is conducted. It's going to be replaced with gold trade notes, and I think the backing for the gold trade notes is going to be done with the BRICS Bank. In other words, it's going to be a gold central bank for the BRICS alliance. It's very exciting. I think this is how the gold standard comes back.
Well, it sounds like they're doing everything right, because what they're essentially doing is really starting to displace a lot of the places where treasury notes used to like to be held. I've heard that they're actually America's then turning around and buying the treasury notes back via the Federal Reserve, printing a bunch of extra money. Is that true?
Well, yeah, the Fed is now engaged in $1 trillion per month in volume hidden as part of QE. $1 trillion a month. They admit to about 40 billion a month, and it's 25 times larger than that. The evidence is in the failures to deliver in treasuries and the huge buildup in reverse repos that's evident on the Fed's website. It's a gigantic $2 trillion increase of reverse repos just in the last few months. Reverse repo is an abomination. What they're saying is we're going to put money out there without collateral. That's what the repo is. But the reverse repo is we're going to put money in there without the collateral. It's 40 billion a day. No, I think there's something else going on that it's going to be really, really big. It's the Saudis are pissing in their pants now, fearing a palace coup. Because King Salman is in the hospital or at clinics or something, or maybe in his own backyard watching the lizards run around because he's got senile dementia. The king of Saudi Arabia has senile dementia, and we've been talking about this for years. Eventually, Fahd died, and then Abdullah took over, and he was really not a weakling. Fahd and Abdullah were equally strong brothers. Well, now it's like the runt of the litter. King Salman is in charge, and he's got senile dementia, and all kinds of brothers, half-brothers, are challenging the throne, and the crown prince has taken over, and he's only in his 30s, and he's making trips to the Kremlin, cutting deals with Putin. And it's very exciting because I think we're on the edge here, on the cusp of where the Saudis say, we will accept RMB payment for crude oil, and we will work with Russia to do pricing in RMB for crude oil. And furthermore, we will be working with China, Iran, Russia, all together, bringing in the United Arab Emirates to make sure that we have agreements on oil output, and OPEC is no longer an issue. It's defunct, kaput. So Russia is going to be involved with oil policy and pricing. China will be involved in RMB payments for oil, and the Saudis are desperate to find a new protector right now because they're about to be dethroned and maybe beheaded. Brothers looking to take control of the throne. It's absolute chaos inside Saudi Arabia. You've got King. I can't remember the right name, but it was a king before Fahd. I think it was Faisal. King Faisal had about, I don't know exactly, he had about 30 or 40 sons from 15 different women. You know, some of the women came from strong, powerful families. So not all these half-brothers are of equal stature. Some of them have big business wealth. Some have been connected to the oil wealth channels for a long time. Some of them don't have much of any money at all, and they want it. Some have been kept out of power for 20 years, and it's payback time. So we got very interesting dynamics going on in Saudi Arabia among the half-brothers. At the same time, the people are pissed off at being so damn poor while the royals are living in opulence. At the same time, you have the Islamic reform movement going on. They'd like not to have their hand cut off. for stealing something, wanting, an opportunity in life and going to school. I just learned that there are more doctorates in Saudi Arabia among the women than there are among the men. And I think the women might feel, well, I need an education if I'm going to get anywhere, but if I'm a man, all I need is a good connection. So we got a lot of issues going on here that are going to tear apart the House of Saud while their southern border is in chaos with Yemen. And just a little hint about the war in Yemen. Take a look at the map and you see that Yemen shares a border with Saudi Arabia on the same plot of land called the Arabian Peninsula. In other words, it makes great sense to assume that Yemen is loaded with oil. The Yemen war is a power grab for oil by the Saudi royals. It's like saying the United States is full of oil, but Canada's got none. No, they're connected. They're neighbors. They're on the same continent. Well, the Arabian Peninsula has Oman on the side, UAE on the side, and Yemen to the south. They all have oil, and Yemen has produced nothing. So expect to hear about oil discoveries in Yemen in the next couple of years, and a fight over who owns it, and the Saudis will try to steal it.
Now, considering what's going on with the Saudis, this is a great place to put in one of the questions I asked you. Oil prices are going lower. What is this going to do to the U.S. economy long term as yet more alternative fossil fuel, especially fracking production sources, begin going offline?
Well, let's just demonstrate one of the major factors why oil will continue going down. And it has, I'd like to leave the dollar out of this argument. I've been saying now for several months, the dollar has gone up in its valuation as demonstration of the dismantling of a large, complex set of enormous petrodollar derivatives. And U.S. press doesn't like to talk about derivatives. But apart from that, here we are now. Let's just call it $45, $50 oil. I don't know the exact price, but I think it's in that range. Where do we go from here? Iran, I don't know exactly how it happened, but they're out of the doghouse. And I think it's Russia and China that made sure it happened. They basically told the U.S. and the West, enough is enough of your stupid sanctions. They're not a nuclear threat. The real nuclear threat is, United States and maybe its big partner in the southeast corner of the Mediterranean. And besides, aren't we seeing some nuclear things happening in Ukraine where the U.S. is all over the place? All right, so Iran is out of the doghouse, and they've got a lot of locked up funds in Western banks that are just frozen. And as soon as these Iran nuclear talks are done and signed and sealed and implemented on the changes, we're going to see a lot of money flow back into Iran and end their price inflation problems and end some of their economic problems. But the big kicker regarding Iran is that they've got 20 giant super oil tankers. They're not regular oil tankers. They got 20 giant super tankers holding between 90 and 100 million barrels of oil. Okay? And they've had these built by the Chinese shipbuilding firms in the last 2 years during the time the sanctions have been in effect, authorized like the uber global warlord, the United States. So the deal goes like this. These are hammered out deals that are in the process of coming to pass. Iran is permitted to sell 500,000 barrels of oil per day on the global market. It could start in early November. It could start very soon. Okay, now 2 months down the road, could be 2.5, something like that, they're going to be permitted another 500,000 barrels a day to come to the market. So sometime around January or February, we're going to see a fresh 1 million barrels a day hit the global market from Iranian sources. I think it's a guarantee that the oil price not only will not go up, I think it's going to go back down even further, maybe toward 40. Now, what's the upshot of an oil price that does not rebound? I think we're going to see a lot of standard kind of conventional oil firms go bust in North America. Not just the marginal shale projects and the companies behind them. There are a lot of major oil companies that have shale projects, and then there are a lot of companies that are pretty much dedicated to the shale projects. All of them are going to go under. The hedging for these companies is now at risk of seeing expiration of their hedge oil contracts. Okay, here's how a hedge works. I've been explaining this with almost every interview because it's extremely important. I'll just give an example of, say, Baker Hughes. Baker Hughes, let's just suppose they've got X amount of oil output, and a year and a quarter ago, they were profitable at $86 per barrel. But the oil price was around 100, so they were running a profit. Now, what does Baker Hughes do? They take their X volume of oil output, they put on hedges with the big Wall Street bank, which means they sell forward. They do a short contract on oil futures for roughly their X volume. And they make sure that they lock in that $100 oil price, which means that for the next year or so, under the terms of that oil hedge contract, they can actually make a profit on that set of oil fields where they're producing X volume. Who's on the other side of that? The oil price went to 50, got cut in half, 100 to 50. Who's the loser on that? Because futures are a zero-sum game. It's the Wall Street banks. So the Wall Street banks don't have, say, hundreds of billions of losses. They've got a few trillion in losses from the oil hedging that they've underwritten. So what is the destination of the $1 trillion a month from failures to deliver, showing up as reverse repo, the hidden QE of the Fed? Where's the destination of the $1 trillion a month, but it's the Wall Street banks getting another free pass? Hey, so the big change comes when the hedges expire. They're not indefinite contracts. They're contracts like, say, put on in June of 2013, and they expire in January of 2015 and January of 2016. They're contracts that are put on in the summer months of 2014, and they expire a year and a half later, like January of 2016. And here's the rub. The Wall Street banks took a loss, so they're not going to be doing this again. You know, they might be willing to do a hedge of $50, fixing at that, and they might have some bad analysis that ignore the Iran factor, and they might figure it'll never get down to 40, but I think they're wrong. So they might have some more losses coming as the oil price goes down further. Not a lot, doesn't get cut in half. Iran's not going to cut the oil price in half. I think what we're going to see is an alliance between the Saudis, UAE, Iran, and Russia, where they're going to say, let's pull back on our output in order to cut a favor to Iran and let them sell what's on their super oil tankers. And after a few months, we'll resume some output, but we must allow this oil price to climb back up to, say, $60, $65. That, I think, might be their goal. It's very hard to get confirmation, very hard, but I think that's likely what's going on.
So you think that as these hedges expire, that all this money is going to be lost?
Yes.
Right.
But it's being covered by the Fed with hidden QE.
And this is why they
So
can't
is it really
increase the
lost?
rates.
No, it's backed again. These Wall Street firms did not lose huge on their mortgage-backed securities, the subprime bonds. They got bailed out, and now they're getting bailed out of their oil hedges. You know, it's to keep Americans strong. It's to keep our way of life going. It's to ensure the liberty of the United States.
And the sovereignty of the United States.
I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but is it not keeping our way of life going? I question what our way of life is. I think our way of life is, bankers in control, bankers giving themselves trillion-dollar gifts, bankers in control of the news media, bankers in control of laced vaccines, bankers in control of GMO foods, bankers in control of chemtrail, poisoning of the air. So we got poisoned air, water, land, Gulf of Mexico. That's our way of life. So we got to preserve our way of life. Do you prefer a gold standard over the dollar?
Well, of course, personally. I'm kind of a PM fiend myself. Now, however, I will say this. I'm a little bit different from how you are in terms of I love physical precious metals, and I spend a decent bit of time researching all of that stuff. But I've also really have a decent bit of a background in IT. And watching how the FCC is trying to take control of the internet, there's, CISA just passed, CISA. They took the P as in protection out because apparently that, we need to make sure that we change these terms so people think that it's something completely different when it's, in fact, pretty much the exact same thing. So we have this grip of control on the internet as well that they're trying to grasp at, while they're also controlling, like you said, the GMOs, the banking infrastructure, and all that. And as we move more into the digital age, I find myself thinking that the information itself is going to be also as valuable as gold. I mean, that's why you look at something like Facebook and all these different websites that people go to. What do? I mean, these people monetize users' information, and we live in that day and time. And you also have people like Cameron saying we need to make encryption illegal. And all those things come together and make me also very bullish on cryptocurrencies in general. Now, the PM lovers, a lot of them tend to not really appreciate that stance. However, I have to say personally that I'm in a place where I believe that if PM lovers really look into blockchain technology itself, the underlying technology, not just necessarily Bitcoin or any of those things, but the blockchain technology itself as an accounting, an immutable accounting device, that accounting device is going to lead us to a place where it almost breaks the backs helps to break the backs of these cartels that are manipulating the prices of precious metals. So that's where I really get interested in cryptocurrencies in general, because I think that that's one of the areas where we're going to be taking this. And that's why we call this Beyond Bitcoin, where we do these hangouts, because there's far-reaching implications to this technology. Like, for instance, how I told you about the BitShares decentralized exchange a while back ago, because the way that it's constructed is it makes it so naked shorting and things like that are not going to happen. And how do we see them manipulating these markets is through all these shady practices like you talk about on a nearly daily basis, right?
Well, yeah, I don't regard my position toward the gold standard as contrary in any way to the whole concept of cryptocurrencies, BitShare, or any other legitimate one. I look at it this way. I want a legitimate wheat silo so that the bread is real. And you're talking about exchanging through a window to obtain the bread. And I want to make sure that silo is not fake wheat. That's also, you're talking about the retail and the actual changing of hands. And I'm talking about the foundation. If we have a real foundation, we will not be able to have falsified movements. And if we have a legitimate set of rules that you're on the end, that you're a part of, you're a part of that end, then that's all the better. But I think we need to start with sound money in order to ensure that what is trading hands in the form of stored work. We're talking about life savings here. People working for 30, 35 years, they've got life savings. They're going to see massive losses of their life savings because the dollar is fake money. One of the favorite questions I get is, what do I tell it's often, I'll just say spouse because they often say my wife, but I want to invest in a bunch of gold, but my spouse says, no, I don't want to do that. It's our money. We need to make a joint decision. So what I say to the person is, ask your spouse, what is the difference between money, legal tender, and the dollar? And if the spouse cannot give you an intelligent answer, then that person does not qualify for making decisions on your life savings because of the ignorance.
Yeah.
Not once.
Which is kind of sad,
out
right?
of the 6 or 8 times that I've offered that as a question, not once has the person written back and said, my spouse gave me a really good answer. No, what came back was my spouse gave me a blank answer and threatened in bedroom activities.
We see this real disconnect, I think, in our societies in general, because you're right. We've been basically raised to think that money is something completely different from what it is. And I actually don't feel like I'm separated from how you are talking about this, and the foundation is extremely important, right? Now, the cool thing to me, and this is why I really am personally advocate the blockchain technology, is to me it's very similar to like triple ledger accounting. You know, like the emergence of these blockchains that can quite literally replace the middlemen who always end up becoming corrupt, and replace them with transparent scripts, which is what we call them, and encoding, which basically just do certain processes for us. You know, you want a script to gather information, you run it and it does it. You want this script to gain access to all this information that somebody wants to put into a contract, and it can run. And, you know, let's say instead of going to a lawyer, I have a contract that lawyer and I put together, where after I die someday, if this happens, then this will happen in response to that. And I can set that all up, not have to worry about it being something that a middleman can come in and disrupt. We literally can take out those middlemen because of this for many of these processes that upon which our society has really depended for so long. And now we'll see certain things that became very powerful positions as a middleman are no longer played by a person who can be cloaked in darkness and make decisions without us knowing about it. You know what I mean? We have more control. But, you know, that starts with asking a lot of really deep questions, right? We have to really dig into these things and going back to what Bytemaster was saying, the solutions that are in existence today.
Well,
you said at one point in time
society and commerce based on rules rather than on men. It reminds me of like these little banana republics, including Iraq, and they don't have a big system of laws. They have a giant 150-foot photo of Saddam. Well, a photo of Saddam Hussein is not a substitute for laws and rules and legitimacy. It's a symbol of power. And the same thing holds with the regulators. You know, you have a stock transaction dispute and you want a resolution. Well, unfortunately, you're not going to get one because the Wall Street firms fill up the regulator posts. We're not a society in the United States on the financial side where we're based on rules. We're based on corrupt centers. Now, you made a point a little while ago about, internet control and the value of information. I agree with you. I looked to a certain event that happened, I think it was about 3 or 4 years ago. Jay Rockefeller from West Virginia retired. He ended his Senate stay, his tenure. He was the principal proponent of internet censorship through the Federal Communication Commission. Why did he retire? Well, some might say, well, he's in his early 80s, he had enough. How about he gave up? That they're not going to be able to control the internet. How about he quit? Or how about he heard that the U.S. was going to bring in some giant trade unions like the TPP and the TTIP with Asia and Europe, respectively. He heard about the trade unions and that power play, and it was going to be all done without popular support, without popular opposition being important, and they're just going to ramrod it through like this Malmstrom woman admitted in Europe. I don't take my orders from the people. I take it from the commission. Ooh, okay. I don't think they're going to control the internet. I don't think the TPP and the TTIP are going to last. I think they're going to be overturned. I think they're going to be marginalized and basically pushed to the side and fall off the table. I mentioned my little joke about the difference between money and dollar and legal tender. I haven't found a single person yet to define to me what legal tender is. I made a comment to my father 2 years ago about dollar legal tender versus money. And he said, Jim, that's a bit of an arrogant question, don't you think? And I said, Dad, why don't we just try it out with you? What is money? Yeah. And he said, Jim, that's an absurd question. I said, no, it's not. It goes to the essence of what's coming apart and what's caving in with the United States and its economy. What is money, Dad? And he said, well, Jim, obviously it's what I have in my wallet. I said, no, that's legal tender and the dollar. What is money? What's the definition of money? And he said, well, I don't know. Are you going to tell me and enlighten me, Jim? Okay.
Meanwhile.
And I did. I talked about fungibility, transportability, recognition, and the lack of ability to create it through alchemy. And he said, well, that's all very theoretical, don't you think? And I said, no, it's not. It's very practical. Moving money from here to Belgium to start a business or to Madagascar to start a business is very practical. Having it fungible so that you can move it in a form that you want and having it recognized at the destination, that's very practical. It's not theoretical. So what I have concluded, Justin, is that we've got 3 weak points in the United States and Canada regarding ignorance. We don't know what money is. We don't know what capital is. And we don't know what liberty is. And I think the movement toward gold and the movement toward cryptocurrencies is going to bring to the fore all 3 of these concepts, because without money, you can't have proper asset allocation and capital investment. And without liberty, you can't do much of anything except what they tell you to do. So this is very sad. I focus a good deal of time making sure that my clients read stories that display and explain and teach what money, capital, and liberty are. We're going backwards in the United States. We're not moving toward a utopian society with, full employment and preserved capital, life savings, no ruin, no fraud. No, people lost their home equity 8 years ago, 6 years ago. And now they're going to lose their pensions.
And it's sad too, isn't it? Because this is the interesting thing. After my mom and dad, for instance, they lost a good bit of money in their stocks and all that good stuff, right? They went back on and started watching, MSNBC and, all these money shows talking about how, it's all basically propaganda. So whenever these people go to run to the places where they're going to learn, where they want to learn to protect themselves and gain a better grasp of what's on the horizon, they are literally fed by people who are paid by their own tax dollars to lie to them in some way, shape, or form.
What that's urged to go to the next problem area.
Oh, yeah. And whenever you see this, that's, as I watch all this and kind of what you were talking about, how precious metals and cryptocurrency are really going to help. You see, for me, it's not even so much a coin that the blockchain represents. To me, the blockchain represents the ability to encrypt information, keep it private whenever you want to, and transparent when it needs to be, and disrupt these power centers that essentially become so corrupt because they become the middleman, the gateway to anything that is needed. And we can actually take those power players out now, disintermediate them, and give a true free market to those areas, right? And it's almost like an autonomous entity that accomplishes this for us, and we build it, which is huge, man. That's where I found a lot of hope, because I asked you in here, is there any good news that we can look forward to, any silver lining to the dark clouds coming our way? And you have some stuff, which I'd actually like you talked a little bit to it, but I'd like you to get into it a little bit more. But that's where the blockchain, I think, is really going to be helping precious metals people and liberty lovers in general, because as long as we're the ones asking these questions and we're the ones taking this technology to the next level, as opposed to letting the current regimes of power utilize it for their own purposes, we will find ourselves in that place where we're actually acting as sovereigns, and we're actually understanding and learning what is necessary to have true self-rule. Which I can argue my entire life we haven't had it. But speaking of that, this is a good time to ask you, what silver lining do you see? What do you think everything's going to look like in, let's say, 5-10 years, or whenever this happens? Is it going to be something that's ends up being beneficial for the people on the other end of the spectrum, the people who are, here in the Western countries, completely, largely unknowing of what's going on behind the scenes? Or do you see it being a really tough reawakening and just, a switch of polarity between the third world and the first world, being, the first world is now the third world, and the third world is now the first world?
Well, that's the kind of reverse polarity that I do expect. When I get large, tough questions like this, I try to come up with examples of micro versus macro, because honestly, macroeconomics is one of the most difficult and nebulous and really complicated, difficult areas. But microeconomics is not. I got a hardware store. I'm running a business. I got 16 employees. That's not hard to imagine. And we're thinking about bringing in a new product, and it's going to have to find some new space in the shelves. And we got one supplier who's a little pissed off. Okay, we can understand that. We got an accounts receivable problem at our hardware store. I'm going to have to lay off 2 workers. We can understand that. We got a bank account, and half of it was stolen, and our company is ruined. We have to shut down. People can understand that.
Yeah.
So here's my analogy, starting with the micro and working to the macro. We've got a family that's got a $500,000 set of MasterCard bills. $500,000. And the monthly requirement is, on the order of, $6,000 or $8,000 to pay it down per month. But the income is only about $4,000 a month. We get a $50,000 a year income, and over 100% of it must go toward the revolving MasterCard debts. So what does the future look like?
Debt.
It looks like bankruptcy. That's what it looks like. So the question should not be, how does the future look? The question should be, how is the bankruptcy going to be handled at the national level?
That's a great point.
And I think it's going to go something like this. A massive amount of shut down businesses, and we're getting some momentum in that direction now, from the rising cost structure as a result of QE. Infinite QE means rising cost structure. The Fed actually had a couple of governors make statements in the last few months that the objective was to produce inflation, but we produced the wrong kind. They increased the cost structure, which removed the profit margin and rendered capital useless, idle, and as I like to say, QE destroys capital. It renders equipment idle and shoved to the warehouse where it's liquidated. That's what QE does. And it's not new because that's what I learned in college. That's the effect of out of control monetary inflation. It ruins capital. But we do it and we think, oh, this is great. We're preserving our way of life. No, we're not. Okay, so you're going to have a massive amount of businesses shut down. Tens of millions more being put out of work. And that's the micro shutting down the hardware store.
Yeah.
They put out of business. So who buys the shell of the hardware store? It's going to be someone with money in his hands. It could be a wealthy European. It could be a Chinese. It could be someone from Singapore. It ain't going to be an American. So we're going to have a large swath of U.S. businesses purchased by foreigners, in particular the ones who own U.S. treasuries.
I mean, that's already happening a lot, right?
Yes, it is, and it's going to accelerate. I did something in September, I think it was, my Hetrick letter report, and I was just doing some research on free trade zones and how's the progress, and someone sent me something, oh my gosh, look at that, that's amazing. There are 400 free trade zones in the United States. Here's a map by state. The darker the state, the more the businesses are that are foreign-owned free trade zone businesses. I started clicking on the states and realizing this ain't a small list each state.
Nope.
They're huge. They're hundreds. And most of them are Chinese. One that was featured was in Alabama, where they did a competing bid looking for a sponsor to help them with some loans to start up a copper tubing business owned by a young Chinese guy in his 30s who had a stack of money in his hands. You think some of it was treasury bills? I don't know.
Sure.
So the tough question then comes, now that this Chinese-owned business in Alabama is producing copper tubing, who's the buyer? And the answer was 100% Chinese customers for destination. So what's going to happen to the United States? We're going to be foreign-owned in the businesses, and we're going to have a large percentage of our output sent out of the country in order to work to balance out the $500 billion annual trade deficit. On top of that, we must deal with the $1 trillion annual federal deficit, 30 to 40% of which is the military budget. So we're going to see the military largely shut down. We're going to see large amounts of Chinese and other foreign businesses taking control. And I got a hint on this phenomenon over a year ago when I read about alfalfa farms in California Texas, Arizona, that whole southwestern strip, alfalfa farms bought up by the Chinese, and 1/3 of the output sent to China for livestock feed. If foreigners own the business, they dictate where the output goes. They're going to do it for copper tubing, and they're going to do it for a lot of things. So when people ask me, what does the future look like? I try to give them this longer description, but if they require just a 1 minute or a 30-second response, I say, well, look what's happening in Venezuela. They had a 75% currency devaluation, and now there's a shortage of rice, a shortage of beans, a shortage of oil, and a shortage of toilet paper. Why? Because they're shipping it out of the country in order to try to relieve their trade deficit. Because they don't want any more devaluations of their currency.
Yeah.
And the United States is going to have the exact same problem. We're not the exceptional nation in any respect except corruption. We're extraordinarily exceptional on our corruption.
Really, like, one of the reasons I like to bring you on here is because you are so knowledgeable and you've been watching this stuff and really working in this area. And by working, I mean working. You don't stop, man. For a long time, you have your finger on this pulse, and I'm sure there's a point where even reaches like a level of intuition that you just see a lot more things that you might not have seen before. And I like the idea of mixing that kind of information with some of the solutions, these disruptive technologies is what we call them, that are coming out today. And one of the things that is very interesting to me and kind of mixes with, the cryptocurrency realm is something called 3D printing. I don't know how familiar you are with it, but the more I look into it, they have this thing, it's called a maker movement, where essentially you can use basic resources like this spool that they create for 3D printing, but eventually they're going to have ways where you can actually create your own kinds of bioplastics that you can construct new things out of. And instead of having to go to the store to buy cups and silverware and things like that, being able to literally just print it from home. And maybe even be able to print some for your next door neighbor in your neighborhood if you're the only one with a 3D printer, right? And various technologies like this seem to be popping up that are really disruptive. Have you looked into these at all? Are you interested in them at all? Do you see them helping with any of the issues that we are going to see coming up in these dark times that are probably coming our way pretty soon?
I like to be honest. I'm not an expert in 3D printing. I'm not an expert in crypto. And I like telling people what I'm not an expert in because, if you're a liar, you eventually cause problems for people on the other side who tend to, run with it. If you're a liar, you tend to get caught because one lie must lead to another, and before you know it, it's out of control. And then you have to admit it, and you look a lot worse later than you do at the beginning. Like now, when I say, I don't know. I had a subscription order come in August, and it fascinated me. The guy signed up, and then he immediately, after getting his login, password and username, all that, he immediately wrote me a quick note and said, what convinced me to sign up for your newsletter? I've been listening to your radio interviews for a bit, but you said regarding some topic, I don't know. Yeah. Okay, I didn't know any. I guess he found that to be very worthy of respect.
Well,
I don't fake it.
Yeah,
One of the highest compliments I got was from my manager at Staples. I worked at the headquarters outside Boston from 96 to 2000. I had a great manager, Alan. Let's just call him Alan. We used to call him Sir Alan because he was a bit of a big wig. He and I both had doctorates. He was from University of Michigan. He had a doctorate in sociology with statistics application in demographics. I thought that's kind of narrow. And he said, no, don't be misled. I learned a lot of the things that you did in your graduate program, but you had about 5 fields and I had about 3. Okay, well, fine. He was very good at what he did.
Sure.
So Sir Alan and I, we had a good old time at meetings, taking insults from the assholes, vice presidents who called us academics, even though we were involved in little projects saving millions, like what I did with one particular product, improving its profit margin from 19 to 26%, multiplied by $450 million. So, it's 30 or 35 million. Anyway, Alan paid me a compliment. He gave me a review, and Rays, they weren't big at Staples. The stock options were the thing there. The stock tripled in the time when I was there. I mean, it went up 200%. And Alan said, well, here's your raise, Jim. Here's your review, and it's all good. But, I got to say something. What I really like about working with you, Jim, is if you don't know something, you don't bullshit me. You don't know something, you'll say, I don't know, let me look into it. And often you come up with something intelligent in a few days. Sometimes you say, I just don't know, let's talk about this more. I need to know where to turn. But you're an honest broker of your statistics field. And I think I'm an honest broker of my economics field now. I still get some criticism from people saying, oh, gosh, you claim to have this great record in forecast, but I'd like to point out these 3 that you made wrong. And I write them back and said, yeah, and I got about 25 that are right, offsetting that. So what is your point?
Yeah. Well, I guess my point, actually, I know that you're not asking me what my point is, but
you asked me about 3D. Here's the first exposure I had to 3D. I watched Jurassic Park. I think it was the second one where the young kid was found in the jungle, and he was stealing the Tyrannosaurus Rex urine in order to ward off some of the other dinosaurs. And they did a 3D printing of a velociraptor's horn.
Yeah.
That was fascinating.
Yep.
So I can see that's important. I can see that it's fraught with challenges, but I don't know what's the future of the U.S. economy if it takes control of 3D printing and runs with it full speed. I don't know. It can't be hard, but I guarantee you one thing. Bet you the Asians are way ahead of us.
Well, a lot of these other countries are really amping up. You can tell. I mean, just like what you said maybe 10 minutes ago about the U.S. really not being number one anymore. And I can't disagree with you. Unfortunately, it's to this point where, most of the time spent in the U.S., the downtime is spent entertaining oneself. And there's nothing wrong with entertainment. It's necessary and it's valuable, of course. But it's also important to keep up with reality and try to grow and learn, right? And that's really my quest, and one of the reasons why I've reached out to you, and I keep trying to reach out to other individuals who are on this journey to learn themselves and also teach others, is that this is the most important thing that we can do, is ask these questions and really work together to find solutions. And I don't expect you to have all the answers. I bring some of these things up to be honest with you because it is so easy, man. It's so easy to find all of these. And like you said, like you and I have talked about, we could talk about this stuff for 5-6 hours easily, quite frequently, because it never seems to end. There's always the rabbit hole goes so deep. But then on the other end, one of the things that I have had to try to recognize myself as well is that, like you said, you kind of have to take the bull by the horns. You have to look for solutions, and you have to kind of embody the solutions that you think are going to make the world a better place. So one of the things that I've tried to do is focus on the things also that are going to help us counteract some of these things. And this disruptive tech, I think we're at the beginning of like a Cambrian explosion for disruptive tech that really, and we might have a depression or a really hard time because for some odd reason, whether it's on the macro level or the micro level, right? Like the macro level with a society that has become corrupt and has lost its way, or a drug addict who, has to hit rock bottom before they really realize where the mistakes that they've made have led them and how that led them there and how to turn back and actually having the will to do so, right? It's something that I think is very valuable for us to start looking at some of these things, because as the news starts tightening, I do think that personally, and I don't know for certain, I'm hoping to God that this is the answer, that we will find these disruptive techs and the new generations will grab the bull by the horns, so to speak, and really build these things into the new world that will enable meritocracy and sovereignty and all the beautiful things that comes with
fascism does not take control. Fascism will preserve the power structure of the corrupt system.
Yep.
If fascism is not there, and I think fascism is not going to win, it may come back in 5 or 10 or 15 or 20 years. I think it's the natural tendency of a wrecked system to install fascism, and that's one of the reasons the United States is trying to destroy both its economy and Europeans' economy. From the wrecked field, you can install the fascist state.
Oh, yeah.
But we will have these ideas and concepts, Justin. We will. Now, whether they operate in the shadows and make it into the mainstream for gigantic contributions depends on the political structure and the capitalist system. Will there be any money to borrow after the hardware store shuts down? Here's my answer to that. Yeah, there'll be plenty of Chinese banks. There'll be other Asian banks, or maybe even a Bangladesh bank, because they've got some reserves. There are going to be more South Korean banks. There's going to be a lot more Asian banks in the United States. There are going to be a lot more car loans and home loans granted by the Asian banks and the BRICS nation banks, maybe not so much Brazil, because they cannot even pull their pants up right now. There are going to be a lot of car loans from the Asian banks. You're going to have a lot more employment from the Asian companies without the rosy fringe benefits. Well, we're going to have a transition, I think, to a system. I've mentioned a lot of details of what I think is going to come after the macro level of the hardware store comes into being, but we're going to have a lot more requirements to demonstrate added value, or you're gone.
Thanks for listening to this Beyond Bitcoin Bonus Hangout featuring the Golden Jackass, Mr. Jim Willie. This show has been sponsored by CCEDK and the new Open Ledger platform. Open Ledger is the first truly decentralized cryptocurrency exchange, giving their users the highest level of asset security protection while not sacrificing the ease of use and quick order executions. CCEDK is also integrating their new Nano Card. The Nano Card is a debit card that allows global users to easily cash out of their cryptocurrency holdings and use it for online shopping, restaurants, ATMs, or anywhere that debit or credit cards are accepted. So please head on over to their website for more detailed information at www.ccedk.com. Again, that's www.ccedk.com.